For centuries, an extraordinary war has raged across the world's oceans, above and below the waves.
You could kill hundreds of people with one broadside. These were extremely powerful war machines.
Shipbuilders designed bigger and faster vessels to outwit and crush their opponents.
That nation that has most powerful battleship fleet can destroy the enemy's battleship fleet and therefore control the seas. And if you control the seas, you control the world.
They carried terrifying weapons.
This was going to be the first time that somebody had fired a torpedo in anger since World War II. They needed to get it right.
But ships have also liberated and rescued thousands.
You can think of Girder 3 as basically a lifeboat for persons hunted by the Nazis.
And inspired men and women to acts of incredible bravery.
I will take you there now, to your cannons, to your death. We will sink before surrender.
These vessels and their crews have shaped world history.
As the commanding officer of a missile-carrying submarine, I was directly responsible for helping to prevent World War III.
This time, the age of metal warships arrives.
When she was launched, she was the fastest, the largest, the most powerfully armed, and probably the most powerfully defended warship in the world.
This is the story of 60 groundbreaking and experimental years.
Some of them shout, "Go on with your metallic coffin, you'll never amount to a thing."
But by the dawn of the 20th century, the great metal battleship is set to define a new world order.
You have this headline-grabbing ship. It looks sinister and powerful. It looks like the future, and everybody wants it.
In March 1845, a competition took place that would change the future of naval warfare. Two wooden Royal Navy ships rendezvoused in the English Channel. Both boasted a cutting-edge steam engine. But while HMS Alecto was powered by paddle wheels, HMS Rattler had an experimental new propeller. It was to be a tug-of-war at sea.
The two ships are lashed stern to stern, and as the power is put to the propulsion, Rattler slowly but surely takes control and pulls Alecto backwards at 2 to 3 miles an hour, her wheels thrashing around furiously, huge amounts of water being thrown up to very little effect.
Rattler's propeller was taking the rotation produced by the engine and turning it into unstoppable thrust. The spinning blades created pressure differences between their upper and lower surfaces, pushing water away and drawing more water in to fill the space behind the blades. Rattler was being pushed through the water in winning fashion.
It becomes very famous. There are great pictures of it. Everybody talks about it.
The Times promptly declared, "The superiority of the Rattler has been fully shown."
Britain is a great maritime empire, and the Royal Navy is the senior service. It controls the trade routes across which Britain's prosperity and the very food that we eat in this country flows. So the British public are very engaged with the sea. The national hero is still Horatio Nelson, so this is right at the heart of English identity.
And in the 40 years since Trafalgar, very little had changed in the world of warships, until now. But the battle between the Rattler and the Alecto was not entirely what it seemed, because the Admiralty had cheated. The famous contest of 1845 had been loaded from the start.
So the Rattler's engines were actually twice as powerful as the Alecto's engines. It was not a test. The Navy didn't need to do a crude tug-of-war to know that the propeller was the answer. And she won the tug-of-war quite easily.
The Admiralty was determined to shake off any public affection for the familiar paddle wheel. They had already concluded that for the sake of the Royal Navy's future, this was a battle the Rattler must win.
When steam was first applied to ships, merchant ships as well as warships, it was by using paddles. But paddles were problematical for warships because they took a lot of the side of the ship away. Screw propellers meant that you could put the engines lower in the ship. You had, most importantly, had all the side available for the armament.
And greater armament would require greater defences. By the late 1850s, attention turned from metal engines to metal armour. And as a new decade dawned, Britain revealed the most fearsome naval weapon ever built: HMS Warrior. Warrior was born in part because of pressure from Queen Victoria's husband, Prince Albert. In 1858, he'd seen a French warship under construction. Called Gloire, it had one key new feature. Its wooden hull was ironclad.
And within 18 months, Warrior was off the slipway. That's unusually fast for warship building, then and today.
Warrior wasn't merely clad in iron, it was actually made of iron. Her size, armour and fearsome weapons made her the first true battleship of the modern era.
She has all the characteristics that would define ships of the next 150 years. Her hull is made of metal, her primary propulsion is by mechanical power using fossil fuels.
When she was launched, she was the fastest, the largest, the most powerfully armed and probably the most powerfully defended warship in the world. Pretty much overnight, all wooden warship building around the world, or warships of any size, ceased.
In particular, Warrior's 4 inches of solid iron defended her from the new generation of armaments already in play across the Channel.
In the 1820s, the French developed exploding shells that could be fired from conventional guns. And if these lodged in the timbers of a battleship, something like HMS Victory, when they exploded, they could cause major structural damage. Naval battles are going to be very short and ships are going to blow up.
Developments in wrought iron manufacture offered the protection needed.
It could be bent, it could be riveted and so on, and you could build a ship with all the advantages of size and length that iron gave you.
The Warrior could absorb punishment, but she could dish it out as well.
The main armament of the ship was the 68-pounder muzzle-loading gun. It could fire a choice of either solid shot or molten shot or anything unpleasant you want to put down the barrel. The gun is very much like what you'd see in HMS Victory, just a lot bigger. Effective range of the broadside, we calculated some research recently, it was about 500 yards. That's long and far for guns of that period. It was the best muzzle-loading gun in the world at the time.
Innovation on board Warrior carried over to how she was run. Her crew wasn't press-ganged, they were professionals. And during their time on board, this was the centre of their world.
Now, the men in the ship were divided into divisions, and each division was 18 men strong. And each division lived around the tables you see behind me between each guns. They lived there, they slept there. In the gun deck, they liked to keep the gun ports shut because they felt that kept the warmth in. It was dark and it would have been candlelight because whilst the ship had an engine, the only thing the engine drove was the propeller. Warrior is fascinating for the naval technology, but to me, an equally interesting story is the human story attached to the ship, because this must have been quite a scary piece of technology for somebody in their 30s and 40s, because they would have been brought up with wooden ships with sails, and suddenly you've got to take into battle a piece of equipment that you've maybe not used very much before.
If the technology posed a challenge for her crew, it also posed a challenge for the admirals as well. The Warrior rewrote naval tactics. Since the invention of the sail, the weather could determine who would win the battle. No longer.
You could now make a 360-degree choice of course, and you could choose whether to approach or retreat from the enemy. The wind was no longer dominant.
She was designed to fight outside the line of battle. In those days, Navy tactics were still squadrons of ships in lines together. Warrior and her sister ship were designed to go on the outside, like sheepdogs.
She would have the ability to fight at distance and to keep away from any more powerful ship that she might encounter.
And she was built foremost with deterrence in mind. It's a little bit like the Trident submarines today. That was her role, was deterrence. She spent her life patrolling the French coast, saying hello France, and they went in a different direction, and therefore she was successful.
In the early 1860s, Britain had the largest navy in the world, and in the Warrior, the deadliest combat battleship. But across the Atlantic, the American Civil War would produce some very different metal warships. Smaller, more experimental, but no less deadly. In 1861, a few months into the Civil War, a ship was taking shape in Gosport Navy Yard, Virginia. It was unlike any vessel ever built. An observer described it as looking like a crocodile intent on evil. Its name was the CSS Virginia. The Confederate South at that time had no navy to speak of, and was well outnumbered by the North ships, many of whom were blockading southern ports. By building a radical new vessel, Confederate leaders hoped to successfully take on the enemy and turn the tide of the war.
Stephen Russell Mallory, Secretary of Navy for the Confederacy, tells the Confederate Congress that we want to build a ship that heretofore has never been seen in naval service, iron-plated with rifled guns and a ram.
If we could come up with a ship that was invulnerable, that could not be sunk, an ironclad warship, it would completely rebalance the power at sea between North and South.
But the Confederacy was short of materials. To build a ship from scratch would be impossible. But they had an idea. They would use the hull of a ship, the USS Merrimac, which had been abandoned and burned by the North in the early days of the war.
The Confederates are able to raise her using the machinery inside of the Merrimac. They cut her down and start to transform her.
So they struck off all the masts, and there were guns along both sides, and one gun in both the bow and the stern, but 3 different gun ports for it, so it could be pointed slightly at an angle, or straight ahead, or straight astern.
The workmen of Gosport Navy Yard pledged to work 4 hours extra into the night because it was desperate to get this ship completed.
The Merrimac, rechristened the Virginia, was coated with 2 layers of 2-inch iron plate all the way around. On her bow was the terrifying 1,500-pound cast iron ram. The Virginia was an important project, but surprisingly, not top secret.
It's obvious they were doing this. There were no real secrets in those days. You could read about it in the newspaper. So in the North, the Union Secretary of the Navy, Gideon Welles, thought, well, we have to have a countermeasure to this. We'll have to have our own ironclad.
Welles put out a request for bids, and one came from John Ericsson, who had previously helped the British develop their screw propeller system. His design became the Monitor. With its deck only 18 inches above the waterline, and at just 179 feet long, the Monitor was designed to give enemy gunners as small a target as possible. But Ericsson's most innovative invention was a revolving gun turret, to be made of 8 layers of 1-inch iron plate and turned by a small steam engine. Having won the contract, the designer was given just 100 days to build his ship and have it ready to take on the Virginia.
Now, unfortunately, it takes him 118 days, but honestly, I don't think anyone is going to care that he was late. Something brand new, 40 brand new inventions, and when you're looking at the monster that is the CSS Virginia, you know, you're definitely wanting to defend wherever you can. This is actually a picture of the crew, all different ages, all different nationalities, including Saya Carter, who was one of 7 African Americans on board the USS Monitor.
On March the 6th, 1862, the Monitor left New York to travel south and find the Virginia before she could wreak havoc on the blockading Union fleet. Her skipper was John L. Warden. A member of the Monitor's crew recalled the frustration of the voyage south.
Oh, how we longed to be there, but our iron hull crept slowly on, and the monotonous clank-clank of the engine betokened no increase of its speed. No supper was eaten that night, as you may suppose.
Sure enough, they were too late to intercept the Virginia. Under the command of Franklin Buchanan, the Confederates' new battleship cautiously emerged for the first time from Gosport Navy Yard. Its nearby target was Hampton Roads, the largest natural harbor in the world, which the Union fleet was already blockading. Even supporters of the Confederacy doubted this strange vessel could work.
People throng along the waterbank. Some of them shout, "Go on with your metallic coffin, you'll never amount to a thing." Buchanan addresses the crew. The Confederacy expects every man to do their duty today. And then he points at the Union fleet and shouts, "Those ships must be taken. Some of you all have complained I have not taken you close to the enemy. I will take you there now. To your cannons, to your death. We will sink before surrender." And with that, the Virginia comes into Hampton Roads. A lookout on the Minnesota shouts down to the officer of the watch, saying, "Sir, I think you should take a glass, a telescope, and take a look over there, because I think that thing is a-coming."
The great hope of the South was about to be tested in battle for the first time.
The Virginia came out of Hampton Roads on the 8th of March and destroyed 2 existing Union warships, utterly destroyed them, ramming one, sending it to the bottom, setting the other on fire with hot shot and completely destroyed it. So this was a devastating blow.
It was the first time an ironclad had sunk a wooden ship. This is one of the Virginia's guns from the first day of what became known as the Battle of Hampton Roads. It bears the scars of the fight with the USS Cumberland.
This is a hot shot gun set up to fire red hot shot. So they've loaded it and they're bringing it into action when a shot from the Cumberland will strike right there, knocking off the chase of the gun, firing the gun so it goes into recoil, injuring several Confederates.
But this small success was as good as things got for the USS Cumberland.
It was the worst defeat for the United States Navy in its entire history until Pearl Harbor. And up in Washington, the government was very near panic. Secretary of War Edwin Stanton kept going over to the window and looking out to see if it was coming up the Potomac River to shell the White House.
The Confederates had every intention of destroying the entire Union fleet. But at midnight, a strange-looking ironclad slid into Hampton Roads from the direction of New York. It was the Monitor. The battle wasn't over. At dawn, the Virginia, which the North still called the Merrimac, set out to cripple the USS Minnesota that had run aground the previous day. The crew of the Virginia had no idea that the tiny Monitor was hiding behind her, eager to test out its new weapons.
On the morning of March 9th, the Minnesota is right out there run aground. So that's where the Monitor is, on the other side of the Minnesota. Back over there where you see the aircraft carriers is where the Virginia is going to be anchored. Now, she starts to send a shot through the Minnesota's rigging, and then all of a sudden, the little Monitor emerges.
As we passed down through the turret, the gunners were lifting a 175-pound shot into the mouth of one of our immense guns. "Send them that with our compliments, my lads," says Captain W.
But back on the Confederate ship, Commander Roger Jones has a useful insight into his foe.
He actually has the plans for the Monitor from the Scientific American magazine. So he knows what he's up against, and so basically he knows he has to go against the Minnesota. The Monitor gets in his way, and as a result of that, they go in concentric circles, right? Now, the Virginia takes a half hour to turn around, the Monitor in about 12 minutes. So you can see how the Monitor can cut off the Virginia at every turn.
Below, we had no idea of the position of our unseen antagonist, her mode of attack, or her distance from us, except what was made known through the orders of the captain. That was a good shot. Went through her waterline. That last shot brought the iron from her sides. Look out! Now they're going to run us down. Give them both guns.
And they fought all day long, almost for 4 full hours, slugging it away, nearly touching one another at times, firing the heaviest ordnance they had available, putting dents in the armor plating of either side, but in neither case causing the kind of damage that would require the other to give way.
Both sides claimed victory, but the fact that the Monitor was able to stop the Virginia sinking any more Union vessels was a strategic victory for the little metal ship. But whilst the Monitor may have held off the Virginia, just 9 months later, it would perish at the hands of a far greater enemy.
The Monitor, unfortunately, December 31st, 1862, hits a storm off the coast, and they actually start offloading the sailors. There's another ship that's falling behind at the Rhode Island, and sadly, the Monitor sinks to the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean, taking 16 sailors with her.
The Monitor was found in 1973, and its heavy iron turret finally brought to the surface in 2002. Together with its guns, the turret is currently preserved in an archaeological metals laboratory close to the site of its famous battle with the Virginia.
It was amazing. I remember when I first touched the side of the turret, it was like a dream come true, because I've been studying this my whole life, and it's just fabulous.
Inside the turret were dozens of items hastily discarded as the Monitor began to sink, including mustard bottles, forks, and even clothing.
This was found inside the turret of the Monitor. We actually have the complete coat, the sleeves and the backs and the other part of the front. This fold right here is the user's fold. It's a precursor of what we call a pea coat, probably worn by a petty officer.
The Monitor's crew took part in a naval gunfight unlike any other, and the ship would go on to give its name to a new type of gunboat. Monitors would be used for the next 100 years. But it would take a very different type of warship for Britain and the world to truly take notice of America. In the years after the Civil War, the US Navy had lost its innovative spirit. By the 1880s, its elderly fleet was little more than an international joke. Irish playwright Oscar Wilde mocked their navy as a ruin and a curiosity.
The American Navy was in no really great state after the American Civil War. It was concerned with coastal defense, using monitors, commerce raiding, and so on.
But just a decade later, that all changed, as the United States and its Navy set off down a path that would ultimately see them become a global superpower.
In the 1880s, they began to build some new steel cruisers, and they were moving towards building battleships, their first battleships.
One of the finest early examples is preserved at a museum in Philadelphia, the USS Olympia. The Olympia is a protected cruiser, designed to defend the most vital parts of her construction, but without armoring her entire hull.
They didn't feel that the ship could carry the weight of full armor, a ship this size and power. So what they came up with was a defense mechanism to build a turtle of armor inside the ship that protected the boilers, the engines, the steering gear, the powder magazines, all of the essentials. The sides of the ship were protected actually by the coal bunkers, so the idea being that they're each a watertight compartment, and the shock of an incoming shell or torpedo would be absorbed by the coal itself.
By the 1890s, America had become one United States, East Coast to West Coast. The nation began to look beyond its borders, to new frontiers.
The Americans were becoming a significant naval power, not in the same class as France or Russia or Britain, but they were beginning to flex their muscles somewhat. And the obvious target was Spain. Spain was an empire in terminal decline.
But the Spanish Empire still stretched from the Far East to the Gulf of Mexico, where the US kept a keen eye on Cuba. Here was an island that might hold great value as a US base. In late January 1898, one of America's newest battleships, the USS Maine, sailed into Havana Harbor as a show of support for Cuban revolutionaries.
We thought of ourselves as the example of a people who had thrown off European control and gained their independence. We wanted the same for the Cubans. That was our sort of explanation to ourselves.
But on the 15th of February, the USS Maine suddenly blew up in Havana Harbor. 266 men were killed. It was claimed a Spanish mine was responsible, but in truth, the most likely cause was a fire in a coal bunker. The American press, however, demanded revenge. "Remember the Maine" became the battle cry.
This led to President McKinley declaring war on the Spanish Empire to liberate Cuba from the Spanish yoke, and also to give the Americans the opportunity to have a go at the Spanish position in the Pacific.
And when war was declared in 1898, because of the belief that the first thing you must do is destroy the enemy main battle fleet, the United States decided it would destroy the Spanish fleet in the Philippines, which had nothing to do whatsoever with the Cubans.
The United States Asiatic Squadron was closest to the Philippines and was led by 60-year-old Admiral George Dewey. On board the Olympia, he received clear orders to attack the Spanish fleet. "You must capture vessels or destroy. Use utmost endeavors." As Dewey's fleet of 9 ships sailed for the Philippines, waiting for them off the coast of the capital Manila was the elderly Spanish fleet, under the command of Rear Admiral Don Patricio Montojo y Pasaron.
Spanish Admiral Montijo realized that his force of colonial cruisers, many of them built of wood, quite obsolete with short-range weapons, would be completely outclassed by the Americans. So he put them as close to the shore as possible so that when they sank, the crew might have a chance of getting ashore.
Admiral Montojo ordered his ships to take a traditional line-ahead formation in readiness for the Americans. On the early morning of the 1st of May 1898, the Olympia led Dewey's fleet into Manila Bay. With her 4 8-inch guns mounted on turrets, 10 5-inch guns for broadsides, and 21 smaller 15 caliber guns, the flagship was an impressive sight. And unlike his predecessors, Dewey didn't have to worry about the wind. Steam power offered him a variety of tactics.
As he comes into Manila Bay, Dewey has a choice. He can either anchor up opposite the Spanish fleet and just exchange fire with them until he wins, or he can reduce the risk to his own ships by keeping underway and making his ships a more difficult target for the Spanish gunners.
Admiral Dewey stood in his white dress uniform on the Olympia's bridge, and after 15 minutes of fire from the Spanish, told the Olympia's captain to fire when ready.
Fire! His ships open fire and then circle round and open fire again. They just bombard the Spanish until the Spanish ships strike their flags, blow up or sink.
Such was the force of the Olympia's guns that in the engine room the stokers found it hard to stay upright as the ship was vibrating so much. Up above them, the gunners kept their shoes on so their feet wouldn't burn on the hot deck. Like the Battle of Hampton Roads 36 years earlier, Manila Bay has been described simply as a gun duel.
Manila Bay is one of the last battles of the 19th century. There are no submarines, there are no aeroplanes, there are no soldiers. It really is just a fight between two fleets.
But the marksmanship in this gunfight was terrible. The Americans fired 5,859 shells, but less than 2% hit their targets. The Spanish results were even worse.
These are navies learning about warfare, not navies that are experienced in warfare.
After a battle lasting 6 hours, with many of his ships sinking, but still firing, Admiral Montojo surrendered.
The Spanish fleet had been shot to pieces, half it had sunk, and the rest of it was of not much further use.
330 men died on the Reina Cristina, and 90 were wounded. The Castilla caught fire and sank, with the loss of 25 men. The Olympia, however, sailed for Manila, with the ship's band playing Spanish airs to entertain the locals who'd come to stare at the victorious fleet. Back home, Admiral Dewey became a national celebrity.
He's probably one of our first real pop stars, if you will. He was on everything, advertisements for medicine or music boxes. People had pictures of him in their homes. He was a real hero.
But the greatest legacy of the Battle of Manila Bay was a decision Dewey made not long after the smoke had cleared. A decision that affects American foreign policy to this day. Dewey asked for an army of occupation.
He should then perhaps have steamed away and gone back to his base at Hong Kong. But he did not. He stayed there, and the Americans came to the belief that, well, look, we've created this vacuum of power. We destroyed the Spanish fleet. Now there's nobody else there except the Germans, who came sidling into Manila Bay and said, well, listen, if you have to go and take care of things, we'll look after things here. And the belief was, well, if we leave, the Germans will take it, or someone else with nefarious purposes, or it'll turn into chaos. No, we have a responsibility to stay here and supervise the Philippines. This was clearly not part of any of the motive that had begun the war in the first place, but it led to American stewardship of the Philippine Islands, which created an American overseas, for lack of a better word, empire.
The peace treaty with Spain gave the United States the Philippines, Guam, Wake Island, and Puerto Rico. Within weeks of the Battle of Manila Bay, the United States also took possession of Hawaii.
The annexation of Hawaii, of Guam, and of the Philippines created a series of stepping stones across the Pacific that made it easier for Americans to have access to the markets of China. And so in a very important way, the Battle of Manila Bay made America a global power.
And America's new status would be the catalyst for rapid naval development. Just 12 years after Manila Bay, the United States would order a vessel that made the Olympia look like a Victorian relic. It would copy a revolutionary new battleship design from that old naval superpower, Britain. It was to be the age of the dreadnought. In the early 1860s, the decks of HMS Warrior were home for one of her first lieutenants, a young rising star of the Navy named Jackie Fisher.
He used to go for walks in the South Downs, barking out gunnery orders to train his voice so they could be heard, 200 feet away. He was determined that he was going to be the smartest gunnery officer in the Navy.
And throughout a meteoric career, Fisher always embraced the latest innovations. By 1904, he was First Sea Lord, and in a position to radically change the design of battleships and create a new warship for a nation trying to maintain its position as the ultimate naval power.
The British Navy was huge. At the 1897 Diamond Jubilee Naval Review, it was calculated that there were more ships present than the next 6 navies combined. But we had kind of been first in industrialization, and we'd reached a sort of technological plateau, or so it seemed, and others were beginning to catch us up.
Fisher's new vessel would draw its inspiration from Britain's naval past.
What did Warrior bring to the naval scenery? She was fast and she was strong. And Jackie Fisher remembered that.
The new battleship took shape in Portsmouth Dockyard in secret. It was built in only 130 days and named HMS Dreadnought.
When it was launched in early 1906, the world was just astonished.
At the end of what had been a 55-year design process, we end up with a ship that does all the same things that Warrior had done. It was larger than any contemporary warship. It had more firepower than any contemporary warship. It used advanced technologies.
And as a former gunnery officer, Fisher was keen to overcome one clear flaw in earlier ships.
Battleships had this multiplicity of armaments. Every gun was aimed and fired at the turret by the officer in charge. You couldn't spot and correct your fall of shot because everyone else was shooting, and who knew which splash belonged to which gun.
Dreadnought, though, would hand control of 10 identical 12-inch guns to just one gunnery officer.
And he could fire in salvos. He could press the button that fired the guns. He was above the smoke. He was above the spray. He had a better view, and he could watch the shell splashes of each salvo to adjust and correct the next salvo. So suddenly it became possible to engage enemy ships at considerable range.
It raised the game in terms of naval design. It was a ship that meant that every other warship in the world was now obsolete, and every battleship built afterwards would be called a dreadnought.
And the dreadnoughts were fast. They were the first large ships to be powered by the latest engine, the turbine. A turbine works by forcing steam at high pressure over a series of angled blades in a sealed container, which turn an electricity generator at high speed, powering the ship's propeller. The world soon followed Britain's lead. But of the scores of dreadnoughts built in the early years of the 20th century, only one survives. She is the mighty USS Texas. When she was launched, the Texas, like the other dreadnoughts, was a technological marvel.
Well, I like to think of a little sailor, 16, 17, 18-year-old boy, coming aboard the ship in 1914. Put in perspective, if he lived in the United States, if he lived in England, if he lived anywhere, most likely he didn't have electricity all the time, probably didn't have running water all the time, probably lived in a house that was 1 or 2 rooms, probably shared a bed with his whole family. So he comes on board this ship and it's lit up from bow to stern with electricity. There's running water whenever he wants it, 3 hot meals, his own bed. It would be like stepping into the space shuttle or a moon capsule right now. It's just, it would almost be foreign to the average person, just alien technology almost. Now, from the perspective of what the ship was and how it compared to other ships, there's nothing like it on the face of the planet. She had bigger and more guns than any other ship. She had bigger and more armor than any other ship, and she could move faster than most ships. So if she came into a fight, you knew the fight was pretty much over.
The USS Texas still has her original engines from 1912. The American designers chose triple expansion engines, which had worked well on ocean liners. High-pressure steam passes into the first cylinder, moving a piston which turns the crankshaft, linked to the propeller. The lower pressure exhaust steam then passes into a second cylinder to power its piston, and the process is repeated in a third cylinder.
We joke sometimes and say you can see these engines two places, here and at the bottom of the Atlantic on the Titanic. Because the Titanic had these basic same engines, same type of engine, had two of these and then a turbine engine for the middle prop. And they were state of the art at the time. I mean, they used them on the Titanic because they were efficient and they could move the ship fast. Which is important for a cruise liner as it is for a battleship.
The arrival of HMS Dreadnought in 1906 changed warships forever.
It caused a pause in shipbuilding as everyone else scratched their heads and said, how the hell do we respond to this?
From that moment, Britain enjoyed an edge over her rivals. But for France, Germany and the US, the answer was staring them in the face.
You have this headline-grabbing ship, which looks fantastic. It looks sinister and powerful. It looks like the future. And everybody wants it. The trouble is Britain's lead in cutting-edge battleships has now been reduced to 1.
And so that changed the starting line in the naval arms race and gave secondary powers, particularly Germany and the United States, a chance to catch up with the British, because the Dreadnought had rendered with one fell swoop obsolete all the existing battleships in the world.
By the early 20th century, global power had come to be symbolized by the might of the great metal battleship. But an era that had started with Britain's unquestioned superiority was now more finely balanced. And with new rivals came new inventions like the torpedo and the submarine. The power of the Dreadnought would soon be tested, and the art of naval warfare changed once again.